Hi, I think we're live. Excellent. Okay, we are. Hello, everybody. My name's Amneh Shaikh Farooqui, and I work in the social development sector in Pakistan and have a particular interest around the feminist movement, women's rights, and the intersection of culture and arts as it relates to making and crafts in the country. I've also authored a book recently about amazing, incredible, inspirational women from Pakistan called Fearless. It's sort of like the Pakistani version of the Rebel Girls, and it showcases women whose stories are often missed in the mainstream because I think South Asian women have a lot to offer. And that's why it's my extreme honor and pleasure to introduce an incredible woman from South Asia who has been, in my opinion, super brave, because I know we come from a shared culture, so I understand what this means. But she wrote an incredible book, which many of you may have heard of and read. It's called My Past is a Foreign Country. Zeba Talkhani has lived and talks about her life in growing up in Saudi Arabia and then eventually moving to India, Germany, and now you're in the UK. Is that right, Zeba?
Yes.
Well, welcome to In Conversation with Liberty Books. Thank you again, Liberty Books, for trusting your live channel in such precarious hands. Well, welcome,
Thanks so much for
Zeba.
having me. Thank you.
And thanks so much for taking the time to chat about your work. I really enjoyed reading the book. And the whole time that I was reading it, I was very awed by what I think would have been a lot of courage to have written something like this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel when you have your story and when you want to tell it, you don't think about it as a courageous act. It was not something that I was feeling at the time, but it's only after the book is out and the way people have reacted has made me feel, yes, maybe that was brave of me to share so much of my life.
Yeah, because as we know from all of us, I think particularly our generation that has come of age, as I would say, using social media, being under scrutiny all the time, it can be a pretty unforgiving place.
Yes, for sure. And also, I think from our culture, or at least from my community and my culture, where we spend, and I'm generalizing here, and it's so unfair when we generalize, but to make a point, we have to. And I feel like I come from a culture where these things are not shared even within the community, and it's not a very forgiving environment where we can be vulnerable and where we can be open. And I think as women within the patriarchy, we are so quick to... I don't think the intention is to pull each other down. The intention is to protect ourselves. And in protecting ourselves, we end up pulling each other down because we don't have the mind space or the emotional capacity to be able to do much more than keep ourselves safe within these environments. So I think if I grew up in a different culture where I was able to share what I was feeling and what I was going through, maybe I wouldn't have to write the book. And writing the book was a direct result of not being able to share and talk and to carry the shame of things that shouldn't be mine to feel that way about.
Well, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I'm really glad you wrote this book because, as I'm sure many of the people who are listening in would know, it has resonated so deeply with so many young girls from across South Asia. So while, of course, every region in South Asia is quite distinct and has its own culture, as you said, and it's hard to generalize, but there are certain normative behaviors that we can all admit are part and parcel of the problem. And one of the reasons why, women in South Asia have not done as well as they could have. It's not a lack of talent or grit, as we know. But I think it's really interesting when you talk about, because there's this line from your book, if I can say, there's this bit that I thought was so important because it talks about women policing other women, and the role of women, the ones I'm going to use your exact words, it was the ones being policed do the policing. And I think it's really interesting in the context of what you've just said about the need to be silent and to protect, because women grow up in an environment of fear. And that's where the silence is and the need to protect, and protection can be a double-edged sword.
Yes, definitely. I think when I was growing up, it was very easy to attack or feel angry towards the women who were policing me, because I think within the patriarchy, the men who decide how things go don't have to dirty their hands with the actual day-to-day work of policing, because they don't have the fear. They're going to just blame it on the mother or the wife. And I guess it's a very different scenario for them. So growing up, I thought women were my enemy. And I was fighting against that quite a lot. I was very angry, and I convinced myself that, oh, this is because I'm not like other women. And I think that is also a way for the patriarchy to create divisions between us, for us to be so quick to say, oh, I'm not like other women. But what does that mean? And that's a phrase that I've used so often as a child, as a teenager especially. And now I realize that that's the patriarchy winning, when I try to distance myself from women, when I try to make it very clear that I'm not like them. But we created them as a society. They don't want to be like that. I don't think there's any good feeling in being the person who's constantly keeping tabs on how other people are behaving. There's no joy in it. And the only reason you do that is because you follow a script. And I think for me, the patriarchy makes sense when I think that we all have a script and we are all reading it. And some people, and I guess in this case me, decides to throw the script out. And then suddenly that causes a lot of, yes. And that causes a lot of fear, because everyone else around me is following the script and I'm not. So I'm not giving them the cues that they're familiar with. And instead of having the space to be like, oh, she's doing something different, they see that as a personal attack on themselves, because I'm making it difficult for them to follow the script and to live the life that they have chosen for themselves, or they think they have chosen for themselves. So I find that quite interesting. I realize now that when they were protecting themselves, it wasn't that they didn't want me to be happy. They just didn't know that I could be happy, or they were not sure what was beyond this. And I feel like remembering that and having empathy towards women in our lives and everyone within the patriarchy is so important when we try to dismantle the patriarchy.
No, that's incredibly important. So one of the things that I've always fervently believed in, and it's become a stronger and stronger belief, I think, over the years, particularly in the context of my work, it's something that I've learned, is that while individual women in history have done incredible things, very brave things, they've gone against the norm at great personal risk, sometimes at great personal risk to their lives. It's really when women band together, the sisterhood, so to speak, that women really get things done. So when you look at any country, any movement, not just South Asia, not just Pakistan, India, or any of these countries, but it's really, there'll be a lone voice, but slowly, as that lone voice begins to attract other women who are actually exactly like you, so you're not different.
Yes.
The point that you're making earlier. And it's the sisterhood that's terrifying to patriarchy.
Yes.
Individual women are easily put down.
Yes. And I think that's why a book like yours is so important, because it helps us see that there are women like us. And I think that's the whole point, just to give us that little bit of courage to take the next step. And within our little bubbles, we are made to feel like we are alone. But when we are brave enough to look beyond, and that's been really interesting, because during the writing of the book, I felt like I was the only one, which I think is a natural feeling to have when you're working. Yeah. And then since then, the number of people whose lives are so different from mine and who have been so kind to share their stories with me after reading my book. And when they say, oh, I feel exactly the same way. And there's so many different ways to relate. And I feel like this was something that I was not taught as a child, to relate to people, to be empathetic. There was so much emphasis on doing the right thing and making sure that you are not attacked for the person you are, and to stay away from anyone saying, oh, why is your sister or your daughter or your wife behaving this way? The idea was to just not show any personality, and it makes you believe that no one has a personality, no one has anything, or is thinking beyond what they are saying, which is such sadness when I think about it. There's so many women before me, before us, before social media, before the internet, who have lived the exact same lives like ours, thinking that they're the only ones, without this connection that I'm having right now, or I've had since the book, or before with social media. And just what a privilege and what a luxury to be born in this era, and to be born in a time, and to also be born within a family and within a space where I was very scared, and I was worried about how the book would be
Yeah.
received by people, but
Mhm.
at no point was I worried for my life. And I think that is also a
Yes,
privilege that is so
of
important to
course.
talk about. And
Yes,
I get credit for being brave, but that's because I knew that I would be okay.
it would be
And
okay.
and there's so many other people who have been brave and who have not been able to experience what I'm experiencing now, have not been able to live long enough to be able to see that. And I think that's so important to remember and to remind others as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the power of groups comes in, as you said. And I think, particularly right now, where I don't know if you're still isolating and what the situation is where you are, but I think we're all in, or are going to be for some time to come, just in some degree of, isolation, quarantine, lockdown, what you will,
Yeah.
social distancing, yes. And it's important, of course. I'm not putting those policies down, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think if there was ever a time when we understood the importance of being able to use these resources, technology for good for once,
Yes.
it's now. But I think it's really fascinating, when I was reading your book, one of the things that I thought really stood out for me, and I think it's a really important thing that you share in your journey, is how it inspired me deeply, was how you were able to subvert, and at such a young age, can I say, the way patriarchy employs beauty as a tool of subjugation, and how you were able to just, in very difficult circumstances, just upend all of that and move beyond it and become such a vibrant and whole, as you said, personality. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for saying that. So I started losing my hair very young when I was 12 years old, and I write in the book about the impact that had on me. And I think within the beauty standards and what was expected of you, it was a given that a girl would have hair, and then everything else
Yes.
was like, she's fair, she has a straight nose, and she looks pretty, she's tall, she's slim. So by not having hair, I think I was just thrown out of the spectrum. I wouldn't fit in anywhere. So there was no choice. And when you say it was very brave of me to subvert that, I feel like at that age, at 12, I was not given a choice. I was just thrown out. I was like, oh, you're not beautiful. And that's it. And then it was left to me to build myself out of that and away from that. And I think if I didn't have my hair loss, I would have spent a lot more of my time and maybe all of my life trying to fit in, because the idea of the beauty standards is, oh, it's just a little bit you need to change. And if my hair, we talked about curly hair, we talked about straight hair. And I thought, if I had curly hair, then all I had to do was straighten it. And then there would still be an option for me to try. And I think with the hair loss, I didn't have that option. So I don't want to take credit for something that probably wouldn't have happened without the hair loss. And immediately I realized that when everyone else was working on having smooth skin and trying to fix things that were fixable, the hair loss made me realize that I will never fit in. And how do I feel about that? And personally, I was all right. I felt like I was still able to read books and I was able to go out. I was able-bodied. I was healthy. Alhamdulillah. There was nothing else that I had that was stopping me from living my life. And then it was up to me to decide whether I was going to allow my hair loss to be part of my journey and to be okay with it, or to let other people make me keep feeling bad about it. And I think going back to the topic of the patriarchy and making people feel bad, I think the idea is also, you're not trying to make people feel bad. You have so little power that it can only be exerted in some certain way. So if you don't have anything going on for yourself, you can at least feel good about yourself by knowing that, oh, someone else has it worse. And I feel like a lot of people were using my hair to feel better about themselves, which again, I can't hold that against them. But if they were going to do that, if this was the environment I was going to grow up in, then I just knew very early on that I couldn't let that get me down. For the longest time, I think my hair loss then became part of marriage, who's going to marry a person who doesn't have hair. And that became a bigger thing, where in my day-to-day life, this was not impacting me as much, but everyone was worried about who's going to marry me. And the shame of not being good enough to marry, not being good enough in the future for an unnamed man was a very big burden to carry. And then I just realized that I didn't have to carry it. I could just drop it, and no one can force me to carry this weight. And everyone around me was struggling with my hair loss more than I was because of this. And there was a lot of pressure on me to hide it, to not share, so that people wouldn't find out, so people in the community don't know. And then somehow we figure out a way for my hair to grow back. Yeah, and to keep quiet about it, so no one can know that there's some problem with me. And that was a shame I was carrying. Just because I couldn't grow hair, I was suddenly made to feel ashamed of myself, and my entire future was bleak. And I think the first thing I did, and the most important thing I did with the book, especially, which has been most liberating, is to talk about my hair loss for the first time and to tell people I'm not ashamed of this. And you can stop making me feel bad about it. You're just wasting your time. And I think that's been a very liberating thing for me, which I was carrying for so long unnecessarily. And now I wear a lace front wig, and I'm very happy with how I look. And most days,
you look fantastic, so you should be.
Thank you. And most days I wear a bandana and everything's fine, and it's not impacting anything I do, my work, my books, my life. And I think just realizing that there's some things that it's a societal construct. And you have to ask yourself, everything that's bothering you, is it real? Or is the society around me making me feel like it's real? And that takes away so many things out of your life, so many stresses and worries and unnecessary negativity.
No, I love that you took control of the narrative. By writing about it, you now control the narrative because there's nothing left to hide. But I think the key word for me here is hide, and how much of our lives, particularly women's lives, are shrouded in silence. So partly because so many women are invisible, and as you said, they don't have much going on. They don't have much they can be proud of. They have very little power or control. So they often seek it out in petty ways, and they're tyrants where they can be. But also, I think it means that so much of women's lived experiences and histories and lives are just not documented. And you and I were chatting just a few moments ago about how, of course, that's true for women across the world, but it's particularly true for South Asian women. I mean, growing up, it's really interesting. There's so many, I read a lot, so I loved reading about how much you read a lot. So that was a real point of connection. But I was thinking, recently somebody was asking me, they're like, can you recommend some female authors from Pakistan? And I think they were expecting a long list, but unfortunately there isn't one. And I think it's a little bit better in India, but it's not much better. And South Asian women, I think, are generally underrepresented in publishing. So as a woman who works both in publishing, and you have an academic background that also allows you to comment on that as an expert, why do you think it's so? Is it because we silence women as a culture? What is it? Why is women's voice so lost?
It's so many things. To go to the very beginning of your question about women being tyrants to each other and not having much going on. And I just wanted to share an anecdote, which is in the book as well. When I was growing up, I had this English teacher who I really, really liked and looked up to. And in the middle of the term, she just stopped coming, and we had a replacement teacher. And we also knew them socially, or we knew the wife. And at one of the parties, I overheard her husband complain to a group of men. So it was a party, so the men and the women were segregated. And I overheard, as a kid, the man complaining and laughing and making a joke about how all his wife wants to do or does is speak on the phone. And all day she's just on the phone and she doesn't do anything else. And the reason why she left the job and left something that she was very excited about and happy about was because her husband didn't want to work. And to me, that was so frustrating, where we blame the women for not having much going on, but we also make sure they don't have much going on. And I feel like that's the main reason. The frustrations come because we are so, like every other culture, I guess, we are so vibrant as women. We have got so much to offer. And we are still not getting that chance, which is such a pity. current in current times when we feel like the world has moved on and we are so modern, but there's still pockets of us that don't have the same liberties as others, which I think is so important to remember, because we forget very quickly that, oh, I'm liberated, so everyone must be, and we speak from that place. And I feel like that takes away your confidence as women if you're constantly told that you are not smart enough, you can't string a sentence together, you can't speak for your culture, and there's nothing worth speaking. Your life doesn't matter, and anything you say is no one cares. And if that lesson is instilled in you from a very young age, and all around you, you see women who are not writing, who are not speaking up for themselves, who are not going against that, I think it would be very difficult to then have that courage to say, oh, I'm going to do that anyway. And I think that's one of the main reasons, because we are not encouraging our women. We are not telling them that their voice is worth it. And there's a lot of pressure on women now to just take control of the narrative, like I have done and like other people. But again, I come from a place of privilege where I knew I would be okay if I did that, and it wasn't going to fundamentally change my life. So it wasn't that big a risk. But for a lot of these women, it is a huge risk, and we can't put the onus on them to say, oh, well, if you want to share your stories, or if you want to diversify the industry and the voices and the business and the books, then you need to speak up. I think that's very unfair. And as for publishing, I've been working in the UK publishing industry for the last 6 years. And I did a MA in publishing here as well. And I think from 2012 to now, there's been a huge change. I feel like maybe in 2012, a book like mine wouldn't be published. And now to have a big publisher put their might behind my voice, which is so gratifying, but also I think it reflects on where the industry is. The cover is joyful. It's not a stereotypical South Asian cover. The publicity, the marketing, everyone in my team, in my publishing team, believes in the book. And I think that's the difference. And also for these stories, for my story of empowerment to exist, already shows that there's been so much of a difference. And we are getting to that space where we can have more voices. And I think growing up, what I struggled with the most was that the South Asian voices that were published were always, or Muslim voices, so Middle Eastern as well, and not North African voices, were always about a story of enslavement or running away from their religion, or finding empowerment outside of Islam, or some like really horrific things happening to them. And for them to run away from the culture and to turn away from the culture, those were the stories that were published, and those were the stories that had space, that were given space. And I feel like the publishing industry is changing. They're realizing that there is, we want more, we want different voices. And I think by being readers, I think as readers, we have so much power as well, by simply refusing to read books that are stereotypical, that go against what we believe in or our lived experiences. So I feel like we are all realizing where the power lies, and the change is happening. And I feel so optimistic and excited to be part of the publishing industry at the moment. It seems like the right moment to be in it.
No, that's really, really absolutely true. And I mean, I just want to highlight one of the things that you said earlier, where you were talking about women in the domestic space and how often, and I think it's interesting because I do a lot of work in the gender space, and we work with women across different class groups and all of that, and we often map what they do when they're in the house, those 8 to 10 hours when, husbands are mocking them later for having done nothing. And it's a lot of work. And I mean, I think across the world, this labor has been quantified because, of course, in a capitalist world, we only understand anything which has a dollar value. But this labor does. It does. I mean, the rearing of children, the caring, taking care of the home. So many of us now, even those of us who had probably greater privilege earlier, I don't know if you're feeling this now, but with anybody who had help, people not coming in, a lot more people are having to do this work. And it's interesting when you look at, as children were being homeschooled, how women had to take that on too. So I think, there's a lot of frustration within women. And often a career can be both an outlet, but an additional burden. So it's kind of a mixed plate. It's never really an easy win.
Yeah.
But speaking about, your memoir, because when you write your life story and you're obviously very young and, connected to your family, you said your parents were pretty, and they feature quite strongly in the book, as I imagined they would. You said that you felt safe, you felt empowered to write the story. But what about the general family? A lot of them were not always supportive of you growing up, from what I read in the book. How did they respond, and was it seen as a betrayal? Because quite often in South Asia, these silences are sacred.
Yes, but I think growing up away from India, and for my parents to be the only family and for my siblings to be the only family that I was around, I think they had a lot of, they shaped me a lot more. And I think my life would have been very different. I was still living in India or living within the community that I came from. So I think that distance already made a huge difference. My parents feature heavily. And I think that's one of the things I realized immediately. You can't write about your childhood without including your parents, because they're such a huge part of that life. And I think what was interesting for me is that if you don't reflect back on your life, and if like I did for the book, but I wasn't doing it so much in my daily life, it's so easy to blame the parents. It's so easy to be like, oh, this happened to me because my mom did this, or my mom said this, or my dad did this, or my dad didn't want this. And then when you look back, you realize that there's so much at play. Or maybe this is my personal tendency to blame my parents, which is what I used to do before. I don't know if everyone feels that way.
Fairly normatively normal.
So looking at the book and looking back at my life from a very, what I wanted to be objective, but of course it can never be an objective view, made me realize that it wasn't their fault. And it gave me a chance to look at the community and the culture. And I was very keen. I mentioned a few incidents that were directly related to my hair and specific people making me feel bad about my hair when I was young, very, very young. But that was not the big picture. That was not how everyone was treating me. And what you said about silences, that's very interesting. And to me, I was very aware of it and I was very scared of it. And that's why it's very important for me to not mention anyone. If you read my book, I feel
there are no names.
No names, but also my parents are in it, and my siblings, and other people who have maybe not my family, just part of the community. There were so many stories that I removed from the book because I didn't feel like it was my place, and that was a very important guiding factor when I was writing the book. What am I allowed to write and what is not my place to discuss? What is not my story to tell? So in the book, a lot of the stories are very specific to me. And even though I felt like there were other things that were happening around me that would give you a better idea of the culture that I was part of, I couldn't share that, and it was not my place. So I feel like in that way, I kind of saved my neck a little bit by not
fair enough.
By not doing that. But also I was very interested in people being upset that they were not in the book, or they were not mentioned in the book, or they were not mentioned in the book to distinguish them from the bad incidents that have happened. And I found that quite interesting because that was just something that I'd never thought about. And I thought, if you're not in the book, it's great. I am out of love for you, I'm not going to say anything about you. But that also came to bite me. And I think that's been the big learning curve. The power of books is so great. And I don't think I was aware of the perception of having written a book, and how you're perceived as an author in our community and culture is so big, and there's so few of us, that when you do it, there's a pressure to carry your entire name and your family and everyone that you have ever met with you in the light. And it's not enough to just say your story, which, I'm grateful for this lesson, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I'm not going to take names because, again, as you said, sometimes, you require deeper consent and buy-in before you can do that. But there's a Pakistani author who wrote a book a while back which was sold as fiction, but it was definitely based part reality, if not quite a bit of reality. And obviously figures, it was very heavily based on her family, and her grandfather had 2 wives, and how that whole thing worked out, and how living in that kind of system, what that meant. particularly for the women who stayed home. So it's a really interesting book, but it was very divisive for the family. So I think sometimes you're right, but it's really interesting. I never thought of it from the other perspective, is that people might want to be featured. They might want their stories to be told, but that just tells you the importance of stories.
Yeah, and also that we have so few of them. We need more people to be telling more stories, and more readers, and also more publishers to be interested in stories like mine. So I shouldn't be the only Muslim voice that they're publishing in that year. And I can't speak for all the Muslim South Asian women in the world. That's also not a burden. That is, it's not fair.
If I can, that's what I thought was really interesting, because literally, if I can show everybody here, on the cover of the book, you go with a Muslim feminist finds herself. And I thought, in an era where many women, and this is not just in our part of the world, shy away from saying they're feminists. And being a Muslim feminist is an even more complex and deeply layered and problematic thing to be. As a Muslim feminist, I completely understand and identify with that, but I would love to hear what you were thinking when you lived. I think that's a strong statement to make, because you put that on the cover. There's nobody who can, there's no gray there, it's black and white. Why did you do that?
I love the subtitle, but I must say that at the beginning, the subtitle was a publisher suggestion. So they asked me if I'd be open to it, and I wasn't open to it. And my strong feelings against that statement was something that I needed to work on and be like, what about this statement am I not pleased with? And I realized that what I wanted was the letter A at the beginning, a Muslim feminist, because I just wanted to be very clear that it's just one of me and I'm only speaking for myself, and I can't be speaking for all Muslim feminists. So that was the issue I had with it. But I must say that I love the subtitle, but it wasn't my decision, but I love it now. And I'm so grateful that the publishers made sure that the book was marketed in the right way. And it really made me question what was my problem with being called a Muslim feminist. And I think it's because I've always been attacked for being a Muslim feminist. And a lot of people perceive it as an oxymoron. And I get a lot of people going, oh, how can you be a Muslim feminist? How can you be a Muslim and a feminist? How can you be religious and be a feminist? None of this works. It doesn't make sense. And I felt like I was spending a lot of time justifying myself and justifying my religion and trying to find the difference, or trying to show people the difference between culture and religion. And I do that in the book anyway. And I thought, yes, this is the perfect time for me to reclaim Muslim feminist as a title, because I am that. And you can't stop me from calling myself that, and you can't take away my right to be Muslim and be feminist. And for me to choose, and this is not about picking and choosing within Islam. It's not that. It's about your belief and what you agree with and what you don't agree with and what your understanding is. So I'm not claiming to be an expert in Islam, but I feel like when I used to call myself Muslim online, there were lots of people, and I must say that they were mostly Muslim men, who were very quick to tell me that I was wrong or I didn't understand Islam. But that was their perception and that was their belief. And I think both our views can
coexist.
Yes, definitely. So I'm a proud Muslim feminist, and if people have a problem with that, it looks like it's their problem, really.
No, that's really, really an important thing. And I think it kind of harks back to our culture, where we're so keen on there being one narrative. It's almost like, everybody's heard Aditi's talk, obviously. If you haven't, you should listen to it, people. But that's the danger of a single narrative, right? There can be more than one version of one thing, and it's perfectly okay. I think so many of the world's problems would be solved if we would only accept that. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to be clones of a particular kind. So I am very aware of the time, and I promised that we would allow for questions. But there is one thing that I wanted to talk about before we open it up for questions. And that is, I loved how, you were using books as an escape. And I thought it was really interesting, because throughout your life, that's like a really common theme that kind of starts when you're really young. And I think, if I'm not wrong, it's still I can see behind you, you're well stocked today. But and your quest for that perfect library where you could just borrow as you wanted. But I felt like it was almost dual, like you were escaping from reality. So they obviously were your companions when you were lonely, but also later, everything that you learned from books. And I thought it was really interesting that you learned about feminism later in life than many other people did. It almost became your path to empowerment in a way. So
Yes.
do you want to talk about that a little bit before we go on to questions?
Some of my classmates from school, when they read the book, they read the bit that I mentioned near the beginning about our school library, where all our books were in glass cases with a glass door, and the door was locked always. Yeah. And we were not allowed to access these books in school. And for us, that was normal. We just thought this is how all libraries in the world are, where you can see the books, but you can't read them. And so a lot of my classmates, when they read that bit, they were laughing, but they said, oh my God, that was our life. Like, we didn't even think to question it. And I thought, yeah, so there was censorship in Saudi Arabia, of course. So we didn't have as many books in general. And then when I was really young, the main bookshops didn't have English books. They had Arabic books. Yeah. And then in school, when we had English books, we didn't have access to them. And I have a lot of sympathy now, or empathy, I guess, for the librarian, because we were a huge school and our library wasn't that big. And I can understand that maybe there were not enough books for everyone. Like, I don't get it, but I want to get it. Like, I guess that was the issue. I loved books so much, and I loved stories. I think more than books, I loved stories. And living in Saudi Arabia at that time, it was such as a female child, it was just so protected that you didn't have access to people, you didn't have access to books. And the more it was contested, the more I wanted it. And I think that's where I realized that I like stories, and I like talking to people, and I like meeting people. And books became that. Books became friends that I didn't have, or became... they made me realize that there was a life outside of the city that I'm living in, and that it was possible for me to be the person I wanted to be. Because very early on, like we discussed, I realized that the life that women around me were leading was not the life I wanted. So the books helped me realize that, it is possible. So I'm not being unreasonable. And feminism came to me when I left for India at 17. And that's because throughout my life in Saudi Arabia, feminism was treated as a really bad word that you shouldn't even utter, let alone identify with as a label. And I think I've given a lot of importance to books. And I feel like that's maybe something I can take credit for, because there are a lot of people I see now who read books, but who don't change things about their lives. There's a lot of confirmation bias. And I think there's a level of openness in me that I was able to read a lot of books and change my life, and be open to that change, and be open to being wrong. Even now, I've put something out there in print, and I say a lot of things online, and I'm going to say things here. But I'm open to being wrong. And I think that's what sets me apart, or helped me when I was growing up, to be open and to read widely. I think a lot of people, and I read a lot of women now, but I realize that I do need to keep it wide. I need to read from all sides. So I think books have changed. They've given me power, and I hope that my book can do that for other people.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, especially for younger audiences. I think that are looking for words to describe what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, because so much of what you write in the book is fairly universal. I don't think it's restricted to, although that, as we connected earlier, to an expat childhood in Saudi Arabia. Even when I moved to Pakistan, there's so much of what you talk about that could resonate here as well. I think people are now beginning to ask questions, so I will here we go. Are you trying to build a body of work, or do you want each book to stand on their own? Do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book? Ooh, okay.
Is this for books that I am writing?
Yes. So I think
I feel so much.
What's coming next?
Oh wow, so much pressure. I am trying to write fiction, and it's not going well. So I hope this book speaks for itself, because at this point, during the writing process, you feel like, will this book ever be? And this is how I felt about my first book as well. But right now I'm feeling the same. Will my current book ever be, or will I ever write another book, or am I a one-hit wonder? So I do hope that each book speaks for itself. And it's so important that I've realized that books that you write, or I've only written one, is taken or received so differently as well. So when I hear from my readers, I feel like they've read a very different book to the one I've written. And I find that fascinating. And I find like that's where the connection lies.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. Thank you, Athiya. They really are.
Yeah.
What does literary success look like to you?
That is so interesting as a question, because I've always felt that as a brown person and as a Muslim person, maybe I don't always fit into the literary circles that I see myself as, if I am in that, I will be considered a good writer. And I think when you are the only voice or one of the few voices, there's always a nagging question at the back of your mind that goes, oh, are you here because you're good, or are you here because you are a token brown person or a token Muslim writer or a token South Asian writer? So I feel like for me, literary success would be when I stop asking myself that question.
That is such an important thing to say. Can I say I feel that very, very much. And I think particularly when you're writing for an audience in the West, I think sometimes, and if I can say this, they can be more forgiving than your own people. And then I just wonder as well, is it because they haven't heard a voice like this before? Mothers have. A word on the mother's incident. Which one, Amir? If you can expand on that, because I think, Zeba writes extensively about her mother, who I think is a really fascinating woman. Maybe you can write her story next, Zeba.
She won't tell me her story.
Oh, I do remember that. Yeah.
I would like nothing more than to write her story. Yeah.
Do you speak of your heart, or do you observe others and write accounts?
I think both. I feel like what I observe dictates what my heart feels. I think I allow myself to be open. I'm very aware of personal biases, and I try to be very self-aware of what's stopping me, or if I don't agree with someone, I might not agree with the ideology. And just human frailty and human fallibility. I think like we are all flawed, and just being aware of that. And I think writing from that place allows me to be honest with what I observe, even if it doesn't go with what I wanted it to be, or if it doesn't fit in a neat little observation. I think that's what I focus on.
But you do write very well from your heart, because there were so many things that you said in your book that I think anybody else reading it can almost feel. They can feel what you felt. So that's what I wanted to say. I know I'm not supposed to be one talking here. It's somebody else's turn.
Thank you.
Are there other questions, or can I dive in and speak some more about? I'm not sure. So I'm terrible at these live things, I'll tell you this.
I wanted to hear about Fearless and the reception that you have had in Pakistan, and what was that like for a book like this to be out?
I think people have been really, really supportive, and it's kind of like what you said about your book, right? It's almost like people were waiting for these voices or these stories. Many of the figures in the book. So when I first started writing it, I was just writing it for my daughter, because I was just really sad that she's a voracious reader, probably worse than you when you were that age. But, so she reads everything she can find. And she was reading a lot of, things have changed a lot since I was younger, and there's a lot more books out there for younger children to read about feminist movements, iconic women, and much more inspirational kind of icons to look at and to read about. But there wasn't anybody from South Asia, I realized very quickly, in who she was reading. It wasn't just that there wasn't somebody from Pakistan, so no brown Muslim women for her to read about, and that made me particularly very, very sad, because as you and I both know, there is a strong history of grassroots feminist movement. Like, there is this perception in South Asia, particularly in the mainstream, and I think you hear it a lot from men, that feminism is imported. it's a Western concept, and that's why we're like trying to be like Western women, but it's not true. And I think you say that again and again in your book, in the context of Islam, and some of the questions that you raised as a child. So I was worried that even though things have moved forward so much, there's nothing much that's changed between me and my daughter.
That's my mom saying hi.
Oh, hi.
I wonder if she's laughing at the comments of not sharing the stories.
I think you should. You can pretend it's fiction when you publish it, but I think we would all benefit from hearing your narrative.
Is your daughter really proud of the book?
She is. She really is.
That's so
it makes me really, really, really happy. She told me the other day something which made me laugh, but also made me feel really happy. She said, I'm so happy you're my mom because you're cool and you do things other moms don't. So that's a problematic statement. Of course, she's 11.
Yes.
Because, and I helped her unpack it later. But at that moment, I was like, yeah, I am cool.
Yeah, definitely.
But I did talk about what it meant to say that other moms weren't necessarily, because women do so many things that aren't acknowledged. And,
I agree. And I feel so proud to be my mom's daughter as well, because there was so much she did that wasn't acknowledged or that I couldn't see as well. And when you're a kid, you don't. And it's such a disservice. If there was anything I could change in my life, it was to be kinder, to see what my parents were doing, and they were doing their best. And I think the patriarchy makes it so difficult for mothers and daughters to have open, empathetic, kinder, softer relationships. There's so much pressure on the mother to raise a good Muslim daughter.
Perfect children, perfect house, everything's on the moment. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. And I think the pressure of that, it's taken down many women. But I love that you were able to surpass that, because many people aren't, I think it's that fracture, that confusion, that frustration that comes from childhood will impact future relationships, right? So if you have never understood your parents and I think that's part of growing up, isn't it? To be able to see your parents not just as people who raised you, but as people who had to make some very hard choices.
Yes.
Maybe some choices that they didn't personally agree with, but they felt pressured to. And I think that's a big part of being an adult.
Yes. And for me, I think I've dedicated my book to my parents. This is a huge part of my life and so important. And what I love about them and what I always am aware of and feel grateful for is that my parents support me even when they don't understand me. And I feel like maybe I don't support people in my life if I don't understand them, and I'm quick to judge them. And I feel like that's the one among the many things, actually, but that's one of the things that I'm working on now, to be more like my parents, to be that friend and to be that daughter and wife and sister, the way that they have been for me. They don't understand a lot of the things that I want to do or why I want to do. I think my mom really struggled with, why did I want to write about my hair? She thought, it's done now. It's in your past. You are living a life that you are happy with. Why do you have to bring it up? But it was so important for me to look back and stop carrying that shame. And not a lot of people understand that, but I'm so grateful for my parents for supporting me.
Yeah, no, I think that is very, very incredible. And if there's parents listening today, I think there's an important lesson there. You can have a relationship fraught with anxiety and discord growing up, but everything can be repaired when you put effort into it.
Yes.
And that goes for, I think sometimes, particularly with familiar relationships, we take them for granted. We expect them to be right. And if they're not right, that's it. But it's like any other relationship. It can be worked on.
Yeah.
And,
we have time. How are we doing for time?
I think we have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. Just about relationships. And I was thinking, I'm also the eldest sister. And when I talk about being the victim of the patriarchy, it's also very important for me to mention that when I had that power of being the elder sister, I just misused it a lot and terrorized my siblings. And no one thought to correct me because I was the elder sister and everyone called me Api or Didi. And I feel like it's so important on every level, even at that level as a sibling. Why do you feel power over your younger siblings, or why do you expect things from them, and why do they have to look up to you? I think questioning every single relationship within the patriarchy and outside of it is just so important and has been life-changing, I think, for me.
No, that's a wonderful note to end on, and I think something to reflect upon. But if I can say, there's also really interesting, as an older sister myself, oldest child, oldest sister, I was not a tyrant, I think. I mean, they're not here listening right now, so I'll project myself as this loving, no, I'm just kidding. We were all awful when we had to be. But I do think it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of reading about the burden. Obviously, we talk about the burden that mothers carry, and that's huge, mothers and wives. I think there's nothing quite comparable to that in our culture, what they go through. But if there's a secondary role, and there's a lot of interesting groups in the UK actually working on this about the rights of the eldest daughter. Because when you are the eldest daughter in cultures like ours, and apparently in African cultures, there's a lot of responsibility, and your behavior is seen as shaping the behavior. So if you make a mistake, it's worse than if your younger siblings do it, because now you've set the pattern.
Yes.
Did you feel that?
Yes, I felt the pressure, but I also felt it's not jealousy, but it's pride. When I look back at the way my parents treat my sister, who's 8 years younger than me, the choices that she is presented with are so different from the choices that I was presented with. So I feel very proud that I fought against my parents a little bit, and now she's allowed to travel where she wants to for her studies, whereas that was something that I needed to fight for. So yeah, I think it's difficult, but it has not impacted me that much. I'm very glad that I didn't believe when people said, this is your life. I fought for it. And now I feel really good that my sister doesn't have to. So I feel like maybe in that way, I can make up for being a mean sister when I was a kid.
I bet. Travel beats occasional bossy behavior. Thank you so much, Zeba. And thank you again, Liberty Books, for having us. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to whatever you're going to write next.
Thank you so much. And thank you for making time for this today. I'm so excited to read Fearless, and thank you for having a book like that out there. So important.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care, everybody, and thank you for joining in.
Bye.
Bye.